December 26, 1996. A mansion in Boulder, Colorado. Christmas lights still glowing. A little girl is reported kidnapped. A ransom note lies on the staircase, and before the day is over, the child is found dead inside the house she was supposedly taken from. From that moment, the JonBenét Ramsey case stops being only a murder investigation and becomes something darker, a maze of contradictions, staged appearances, broken timelines, and unanswered questions that refuse to die. Nearly 3 decades later, the case still stands as one of America's most haunting mysteries, because the deeper you look, the less certain anything becomes. Snow-covered Boulder, but inside 755 15th Street, the real cold was something else. Christmas ornaments still shimmered in the Ramsey home when Patsy Ramsey says she found a 3-page ransom note on the back staircase. It demanded $118,000, warned the family not to call police, and claimed JonBenét had been taken by a small foreign faction. Yet before that day ended, the story would collapse into something almost impossible to process. JonBenét Ramsey, 6 years old, was reported missing on December 26, 1996. Hours later, she was found dead inside the same house. The case remains unsolved. That single fact shattered the logic of the crime. Kidnappings depend on distance. This one ended in terrifying proximity. The child who was supposed to be out in the dark, somewhere beyond reach, was still under the family's roof. Hidden in the basement. Inside the walls that should have been safest. In one instant, the scene changed from an abduction to a far more disturbing possibility. Either a killer entered the home, staged a kidnapping, murdered a child, and escaped unseen, or the scene itself had been built to mislead from the beginning. Then came the second rupture, the ransom note. It was not brief. It was not rushed. It stretched across 3 pages with dramatic language, warnings, and strange flourishes. Investigators would later note how unusual that was. The paper came from inside the house. The pen came from inside the house. Reports also described a practice draft. Evidence that should have pointed outward seemed, instead, to circle back into the family's private space. And that is where the case became more than a homicide. It became a war between narratives. Was this the work of an intruder bold enough to linger, write, and perform? Or was the note the most intimate clue of all, a message created by someone already inside the story? Even the ransom amount seemed to provoke suspicion. The demand matched John Ramsey's recent bonus almost exactly. Maybe that meant access. Maybe it meant knowledge. Or maybe, in a case this chaotic, coincidence had become indistinguishable from design. Then America entered the room. JonBenét was not just a victim in a police file. She was a child whose pageant photos would be replayed until they hardened into cultural memory. The case exploded across television, tabloids, and true crime speculation. A murder investigation became a public theater of suspicion. Every movement was watched. Every interview was dissected. The question was no longer only what happened in that house. It was who could survive being seen inside a mystery that large. But beyond the noise, the physical reality remained brutal. Public case summaries state that JonBenét died from strangulation, and the killing has also been described as involving blunt force trauma. Another thread has never fully disappeared: DNA from an unidentified male found in evidence associated with the crime, a detail that has fueled years of argument over whether advancing forensic methods could still change the case. Because in this house, every clue seemed to do 2 things at once: reveal a path forward, and erase it again. So the mystery begins with a contradiction so severe it still disturbs investigators, journalists, and the public nearly 3 decades later. A kidnapping with no kidnapping, a note that feels both theatrical and intimate, a crime scene that seems to speak in 2 voices at once. And buried beneath all of it is the question that refuses to die: was the greatest loophole in the JonBenét Ramsey case hidden in the evidence, or in the story investigators believed they were looking at? To understand the loopholes in the JonBenét Ramsey case, you have to enter the house as if it were a machine built to confuse. Every staircase, hallway, and assumption matters. The official story began with a kidnapping note, but the geography of the home kept pulling investigators downward, toward the basement, toward the wine cellar room, toward a body that had never actually left the property. That contradiction is the hidden mechanism at the center of everything. The crime scene did not simply contain evidence. It appeared to contain competing scripts. The ransom note is where many investigators, journalists, and viewers still become trapped. It was unusually long, written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, with a pen from inside the Ramsey home, and it demanded $118,000, an amount strikingly close to John Ramsey's bonus. In most kidnappings, speed matters. Exposure matters. Risk matters. But this note reads almost like performance, dramatic phrases, movie-like threats, and instructions that seem designed as much to shape emotion as to extract money. The longer you look at it, the less it behaves like a practical document, and the more it resembles an attempt to control the narrative before police arrived. Then there is timing. Patsy Ramsey called 911 despite the notes, warning not to involve authorities. Friends were invited into the house. Officers arrived, but the scene was not sealed with the kind of rigor modern viewers would expect in a child homicide investigation. People moved through rooms. Emotions flooded the structure before forensic order could. In any major case, the first hours are like wet cement. Every footprint can harden into confusion. Here, the confusion became permanent. The house was not just a location. It was an environment being altered in real time. And then there is the body itself. JonBenét was found in a little-used basement room, with duct tape over her mouth and a cord around her neck. Official summaries continue to describe her death as strangulation associated with head trauma. That combination is one reason the case feels unresolved even now. Two forms of violence, one victim, one house, and still no final legal answer. It suggests sequence. It suggests staging. It suggests panic or control, or both. But each interpretation opens new questions. Was the head injury first? Was the strangulation the actual killing act, or part of something done afterward to change what investigators would believe? This is where the case splits into rival worlds. In one world, an intruder entered a wealthy family's home on Christmas night, remained inside long enough to write the note, killed the child, concealed the body, and escaped. In the other, the house itself holds the answer, and the note was not a clue left by a stranger, but a device created within the family sphere. Both theories survive because neither has ever fully destroyed the other. The unidentified male DNA cited by Boulder police remains central to those who believe an outsider was involved, while critics continue to argue that the ransom note and scene behavior point inward. And that may be the darkest mechanism of all. Not just a murder, but a case built on evidence that seems to cancel itself out. Every clue has an equal and opposite suspicion. Every apparent answer produces a larger absence. Which means the true horror of JonBenét Ramsey is not only that a child was killed. It is that the architecture of the case may have been damaged so early, so deeply, that the truth was never merely hidden. It may have been broken into fragments before anyone understood what they were seeing. The most haunting implication of the JonBenét Ramsey case is not only that a killer escaped justice. It is that America may have watched how truth can be damaged beyond easy repair. Boulder police describe the case as an open homicide, and officials have said that more evidence is needed to solve it. That means the story is not frozen in the past. It is suspended, waiting for a missing link that has not yet arrived. For nearly 3 decades, the case has existed in 2 dimensions at once. In one, it is a brutal child murder. In the other, it is a national mirror. The pageant photographs, the wealth, the Christmas setting, the ransom note, the suspicion cast on parents, and endless television reconstruction transformed the crime into a cultural obsession. JonBenét became the center of a story America kept rewriting, each version revealing as much about public fear and fascination as about the evidence itself. And yet the evidence resists final ownership. Boulder authorities and reporting continue to note DNA from an unidentified male connected to the case, while also acknowledging that the note and crime scene circumstances have fueled decades of argument over whether the killer came from outside or from within the family circle. This is why the case feels so unnerving. Most mysteries narrow with time. This one widened. It became a corridor with doors on both sides, and behind each door waits a different version of the truth. That widening has consequences far beyond one investigation. Every unsolved case teaches a lesson about institutions, how police secure scenes, how media frames victims, how pressure shapes narratives, and how fragile early decisions can be. In JonBenét's case, the first hours became legendary for all the wrong reasons. Once a scene is contaminated, once interpretations begin racing ahead of proof, once a family becomes both witness and spectacle, the investigation no longer moves in a straight line. It fractures. And fractured cases do not simply hide answers. They manufacture doubt. There is also a deeper human implication. We like to believe truth is stubborn, that facts eventually rise, that time favors justice. But some cases challenge that faith. Some cases suggest truth is not a monument buried under dust, it is something more fragile, like a voice in a storm. If you lose the first words, the rest may never make full sense. JonBenét Ramsey's murder endures because it touches that fear directly, the fear that what happened can be known in fragments, discussed endlessly, and still remain unreachable. And still, the case refuses to die. New forensic methods, including renewed attention to DNA, continue to hold out the possibility that technology may succeed where certainty failed. That possibility matters, not only for this family, but for every cold case balance between memory and evidence. Because if one preserved trace can finally identify who was in that house, or who should never have been there, then the case will do more than solve a murder. It will prove that time does not always protect the guilty. But until that day, JonBenét Ramsey remains something larger than a headline. She remains the center of one of the most unsettling questions in modern true crime. What if the greatest loophole was never a single clue, but the space between clues, the gap where evidence, emotion, performance, and error collided? We search that gap because we want closure. We return to it because we fear what it says about us. That a child can be lost once in death, and then lost again inside the story built to explain it.